The violation notice was duct taped to my front door like it had something to prove. I stared at the paper, half laughing, half furious. According to the HOA, I'd violated some obscure regulation about unauthorized structural modifications. The supposed offense? A new shed I'd built in my own backyard out of sight, fully permitted, and well within city code. I knew because I built it myself, and I'd pulled every permit legally. But this wasn't about a shed. This was about Winona Prescott. Winona was the HOA vice president, and if you've never met a woman who could weaponize a clipboard, you've never met her. Platinum bob haircut, oversized sunglasses, and a voice like she was permanently on speakerphone. She'd had it out for me ever since I called out the HOA for misusing funds at the last annual meeting. Ever since then, she'd been finding ways to make my life harder. Petty citations, threats of fines, you name it. Violation number 347C, the notice read. Unauthorized structure. Fine. $2,000. I tore it down and went straight to my garage. I wasn't just some guy who got lucky building a shed, I was a retired contractor. I'd kept every blueprint, permit, and inspection report, all neatly filed. I double-checked them and drove to the city's zoning department first thing the next morning. The inspector of the office, a guy named Raul, squinted at the citation. "This wasn't issued by us," he said, flipping it over. "Our inspectors don't use this format. And this signature?" He pointed to the bottom. "This is fake. We've had a few reports like this lately." My pulse kicked up. "You're saying someone's impersonating your department?" Raul nodded. "Looks that way. If someone showed up at your house, we need to know who." I thanked him, went home, and checked my doorbell camera archives. Sure enough, 3 days earlier, a man in a reflective vest and clipboard had shown up, taken pictures of my shed, and left without knocking. The vest had City Inspector printed on it, but something about the logo looked off. I pulled the video and screenshots, emailed them to Raul, and then printed everything. I was going to the next HOA meeting, and if Winona thought this was going to be another one of her power trips, she was about to hit a wall named Victor Granger. The HOA meeting was held in the clubhouse across from the tennis courts, a building that looked like it was trying too hard to be elegant with its faux columns and peeling beige paint. I arrived 10 minutes early, not because I was eager, but because I wanted a front row seat when the truth came out. Inside, the usual crowd was already gathering. Retirees, a few young couples, and the board itself seated at a long plastic table draped with a navy blue cloth. Winona sat dead center, flanked by the president, Greg Halvorson, and the treasurer, a quiet woman named Colleen, who never looked comfortable in her seat. Winona was flipping through a binder with theatrical precision, pretending not to notice me as I took a seat in the front row. The meeting opened with the usual droning: last month's budget, landscaping updates, a reminder about trash bin placement. I waited. Let them warm up. My moment came when they opened the floor to community concerns. I stood without raising my hand. "I have a concern," I said, projecting my voice just enough to quiet the chatter. Winona looked up finally, her expression tight. "Victor, we can add you to the agenda for next month." "No need," I said. "This won't take long." I reached into the folder I'd brought and pulled out a stack of printed photographs, timestamp stills from the doorbell footage, and copies of the permits I'd filed with the city. I walked up and laid them on the table, facing the board. "That's documentation of the shed in my backyard," I said. "All permitted, inspected, and approved. What you'll also see is a man impersonating a city inspector taking photos of it last week. He didn't knock, didn't leave a card, and didn't return my calls because according to the zoning office, he doesn't exist." Murmurs rippled through the room. Winona's face didn't change, but Greg leaned forward, squinting at one of the photos.
"Hold on," he said.
"Who is this guy?" "That's what I'd like to know," I said, handing him a copy of the city's official statement. They confirmed the badge was fake, and the citation I received was forged. Someone tried to pass off a fine using a fabricated document and a phony inspector. Colleen looked up from the paperwork with a rare show of emotion. That's illegal. Yeah, I said. It is. Winona finally spoke. This is a misunderstanding. We received a complaint, and I forwarded it to the city. They must have sent someone out. No, I said, cutting her off. The city doesn't conduct surprise inspections based on HOA requests, and they definitely don't send people without identification. Someone paid this guy. Winona's fingers twitched at the edge of her binder. I took it further. I continued. I had a friend at the city attorney's office run a check. The man in the video? His name's Daniel Frakes. Private contractor. Not licensed as an inspector in this state. But guess what he does freelance work for? I pulled out one final paper, a printed invoice, obtained through a subpoena request filed with the city attorney's help. This is a payment made to Frakes from a personal account belonging to Winona Prescott. Dated the same week my shed was built. Gasps erupted around the room. Greg's face went pale. You forged a citation? He asked, voice barely above a whisper. You hired someone to pose as a government employee? Winona's voice sharpened. You think you know what this neighborhood needs? I've been trying for years to keep this place from falling apart, and he builds some oversized shack behind his house like we don't have standards. You don't get to fake an inspection because you don't like my shed, I said. Colleen stood up. This isn't a debate. If this is true, we need to call the police. They already know, I said. I filed a report yesterday. And guess who showed up at my house this morning? 2 detectives and a fraud investigator. Winona pushed back from the table, the chair screeching behind her. This is ridiculous. You're twisting everything. Greg reached across and grabbed her wrist.
Sit down.
You're not going anywhere. She jerked away and made for the door, but 2 uniformed officers were already stepping into the room. The tension broke like a snapped cable. Winona Prescott, one of them said. She froze. You're under arrest for fraud, impersonation of a public official, and filing false government documents. The room was silent as they read her rights. She didn't cry, didn't plead, just clenched her jaw and let them cuff her. As she was escorted out, she looked back at me with a glare that could have melted steel. I didn't look away. I didn't have to. With Winona gone, the meeting broke into chaos. Neighbors whispered in small groups, some shocked, others oddly satisfied. Greg called for an emergency vote to suspend her from the board indefinitely. The motion passed without a single dissent. Afterward, Greg approached me while I was gathering my papers. I didn't know, he said. I swear. I believe you, I replied. But you might want to audit the last year's expenses. If she was willing to fake a city fine, who knows what else she's been doing? He nodded slowly.
Yeah.
I think we've got a lot to clean up. As I walked out into the night air, I passed a few neighbors who nodded at me in quiet appreciation. One of them, a retired school bus driver named Denise, clapped me on the shoulder and said, "About time someone stood up to her." I didn't need applause. I just wanted the truth out. And now that I had a feeling more was going to surface. Because people like Winona never work alone. By the end of the week, the clubhouse bulletin board looked like a crime scene evidence wall. Greg had posted a public notice about an internal audit of HOA finances, and the forensic accounting firm he'd hired wasn't wasting time. They'd already requested bank records, check copies, and vendor contracts. Word spread fast. This wasn't just about a shed anymore. Thursday afternoon, a knock at my door interrupted my recocking project. I opened it to find a woman in a sharp black blazer and a badge clipped to her collar. Victor Granger? I nodded. Special Agent Dana Wilkes, Department of Justice. May I come in? I stepped aside, motioning her toward the kitchen. She sat at the table, slid a folder from her bag, and opened it to a page filled with wire transfer records, some highlighted in yellow. We've been tracking a pattern of small-scale HOA fraud in private communities across the county, she said. Karen Prescott's arrest triggered a red flag in our system. Turns out, she's linked to at least 2 other associations with irregularities. She was on other boards? I asked, pouring her a glass of water. Not officially, Dana said, glancing at the file. But we've found email threads where she advised other board members on creative enforcement strategies. In one case, a similar fake inspection led to an elderly homeowner losing their home through a manufactured lien. I leaned back in my chair. You're saying this could be part of a larger operation? That's what we intend to find out. Dana set the folder down and looked at me. We'd like your help. You uncovered this without knowing the scope. You're familiar with your HOA structure, and your background in contracting gives you an edge. If you're willing, we could use you as a liaison while we dig. I didn't hesitate. Whatever you need. The following Monday, Greg called an emergency board session not open to the public. He invited me and 2 other residents who had volunteered to act as interim oversight. The agenda was brutal. Over 70 flagged transactions from the past 2 years, many involving vague line items like infrastructure consulting and beautification coordination. Colleen sat at the far end, glassy-eyed but determined. This one here, she said, pointing at a check made out to a company called Sunridge Management. That's not a vendor we ever approved. I flipped through the folder Dana had given me. Sunridge was dissolved last year. But before that, it was registered under the name of Daniel Frake's cousin. He's the guy who posed as the inspector. Greg exhaled through his nose. So, she was funneling HOA money through shell companies and hiring people to enforce non-existent violations? Looks that way, I said. She had access to all the records, Colleen added. She was the one who insisted on digitizing everything, but kept the passwords to herself. I've got a forensic tech reviewing the hard drives now, Greg said. We may be able to recover deleted files. The next day, 3 residents showed up at my door with manila envelopes. Each one held their own set of documents, letters from Karen threatening fines, notices of violations they'd never heard of, and in one case, a bank statement showing a sudden withdrawal from the HOA escrow account for a compliance settlement. She told me not to talk about it, said Clint, a retired postal worker with a limp from old service injuries. Said it would only make things worse. I thought I was the only one. You weren't, I said. By Friday, Greg received a subpoena from the district attorney's office. A grand jury was being assembled. The evidence we'd collected, fraudulent citations, fake inspections, embezzled funds, had built a compelling case. Karen wasn't just facing a slap on the wrist. She was looking at federal wire fraud, impersonation of a government official, and racketeering under state law. Meanwhile, the HOA's reputation was in freefall. Vendors were refusing to sign new contracts until the board was restructured. The landscaping crew stopped showing up. Trash pickup was delayed. Residents were furious, but not at me. At the next open meeting, a line stretched out the door. Denise, the former bus driver, stood at the podium and read a petition signed by over 100 residents demanding a full re-election of the board. We didn't elect a monarchy, she said. And we sure didn't sign up to be extorted in our own homes. Greg nodded solemnly. We'll hold a vote within 30 days. Until then, I'm stepping down as president. We need transparency, and that starts at the top. Cheers erupted. It was the first time in months people had clapped for something that didn't involve a neighborhood bake sale. Later that week, I met Dana again, this time at the federal building downtown. Thought you'd want to see this, she said, sliding a photo across the table. It was Karen, in an orange jumpsuit, seated in a courtroom. She tried to claim mental duress, Dana said. Didn't hold. Her lawyer's already negotiating a plea, but the charges are too serious for her to walk. She always acted like she was untouchable, I said. Dana closed the folder. People like her often do. Until someone keeps records. As I walked out of the building, the air felt different. Lighter. Back at the neighborhood, the cleanup had begun. Volunteers repainted the clubhouse. A group of teenagers planted new flowers by the entrance sign. A retired accountant named Marcy offered to handle the books until the new board was elected. And the shed? Still standing. Still legal. But now it had a new addition, a small wooden sign carved by hand. Victor's Victory. I didn't put it there. Someone did it quietly, during the night, no note, no announcement. Just a gesture. And in this neighborhood, that said everything. 3 weeks after the board overhaul began, the neighborhood was finally starting to look like itself again. Not the over-manicured, tightly wound version that Karen Prescott pushed, but the real one. Kids rode bikes down the sidewalk without being told their helmets were non-compliant. Porch lights stayed on past 10 without warning letters, and for the first time in years, the HOA's group email wasn't flooded with veiled threats. The power vacuum left by Karen had created something unexpected: collaboration. But beneath the surface, the real storm was just beginning to break. I got the call from Agent Wilkes on a Wednesday morning while I was restaining my deck. She didn't waste time. "Victor, we've found something else. You'll want to see it for yourself." I met her at the county records building. She was waiting in a side office, a laptop in front of her and a file box labeled Prescott sitting on the table. We pulled subpoenaed financials from the HOA's escrow accounts and matched them against Karen's personal banking activity, she said. Turns out, she wasn't just paying fake inspectors. She was laundering money through a fictitious vendor network. She clicked a few windows open. This shell company, Oak Lantern Services? It billed the HOA for weed control, pest inspection, even security patrols over $60,000 across 18 months. But it doesn't exist. The business license is a forgery. The mailing address goes to a UPS store P.O. box. I looked closer. And the account it deposits to? Wilkes turned the screen slightly. Belongs to a trust fund her nephew opened last year. He's 19. No employment records, no tax filings. Karen set him up as a silent beneficiary. I rubbed my jaw. So, she was funneling HOA fees into a private account under a fake company name, then filtering it through a relative to hide the trail. Wilkes nodded. Classic laundering model. But here's where it escalates. One of the invoices was for a community safety audit. It included a payment to a firm that doesn't exist, but the amount matches a withdrawal from HOA reserves earmarked for emergency maintenance. I glanced at the figure. That's almost $20,000. She closed the laptop. We now believe Karen was creating emergencies on paper, requesting fund transfers, then pocketing the money through a network of fake documentation. That same afternoon, a federal indictment was filed, 17 counts, ranging from wire fraud and financial conspiracy to impersonation of a legal authority. The U.S. Attorney's Office was pursuing enhanced sentencing due to Karen's use of fraudulent citations to generate revenue. The news spread fast. By nightfall, it was on the local broadcast. Footage of Karen being escorted in handcuffs from the federal courthouse aired over a somber voiceover detailing the charges. No neighbors celebrated publicly, but I noticed more porch lights on than usual, and a few folks left notes on my mailbox. Not thank you cards. Just quiet acknowledgments. A nod to what had been endured, and what had been stopped. 2 days later, Greg invited me and 3 other residents to attend the first official board election under the new bylaws. No one from Karen's old circle ran. Instead, a retired firefighter, a school counselor, a civil engineer, and a software analyst were voted in with overwhelming support. Their campaign flyers had all said the same thing: no more secrets, no more bullies. After the meeting, Greg pulled me aside. "There's something else you ought to know," he said. When we turned over the HOA's private server to the auditors, they found an archive of emails. Karen had been coordinating with a title company to flag problem properties. My brow furrowed. What does that mean? She was trying to get homes devalued through artificial liens, he said. If she could push a property into delinquency through fines, it would go up for HOA auction. Then she'd have a friend at the title office transfer the listing to a holding company. And then what? She'd buy it through a third party at a reduced rate, clean the record, and flip it. That's real estate fraud, I said quietly. We've already sent it to the DA's office. They're adding it to the case. The next week, I testified before the grand jury. So did Clint, Denise, and 7 other homeowners who'd received phony violations or threats of lien placements. One woman, a single mother named Mara, broke down halfway through her testimony. Karen had fined her over $3,000 for excessive lawn debris, which turned out to be a few kids' toys left out for a weekend. She'd almost lost her home. The grand jury returned its decision in 2 hours, indictment on all counts. Karen's trial was scheduled for the following month, but she never made it that far. Her lawyer negotiated a guilty plea in exchange for a reduced sentence no less than 8 years in federal prison, with full restitution to the HOA and all affected homeowners. The court ordered the seizure of her remaining assets, including the shell accounts and properties tied to fraudulent liens. The judge didn't sugarcoat it. You abused a position of trust to systematically extort and defraud your neighbors. You used fear, deception, and manipulation not for safety, but for profit. The court does not take that lightly. Karen didn't respond. She kept her eyes fixed on the table in front of her as the sentence was read. After the hearing, Agent Wilkes met me outside the courthouse. You did more than build a shed, she said. You helped us crack a network of HOA exploitation that went deeper than anyone expected. I just wanted them to stop messing with people, I said. She gave a rare smile. They have. And now others will too. We're using this case to launch a broader investigation into HOA fraud across the state. The months that followed were quieter. Grass grew a little longer between mowings. Kids left sidewalk chalk drawings that no one power washed away. At the annual neighborhood barbecue, no one checked the color of the napkins or measured the spacing of the chairs. The new board released a full transparency report detailing bank balances, vendor contracts, and a regular audit schedule. No passwords were hidden. No citations were issued without proof and review. As for the shed, it had become something of a local landmark. People stopped by to ask about its layout, its permits, even its stain color. I gave tours now and then, always ending with the same line. This whole thing? It started because someone didn't like that I built something without asking her first. One afternoon, Mara came by with her daughter. She looked around, then handed me a manila envelope. From the restitution fund, she said. They said you were owed for legal costs. I didn't open it. I just nodded and handed her a cup of lemonade. You know, she said, when I first moved here, I thought the HOA was supposed to protect the value of the neighborhood. It should, I said. But only if the right people are in charge. The sun dipped low behind the rooftops. A breeze rustled the trees. And for the first time in a long time, the place didn't feel like someone else's domain. It felt like home.